What's
Hello, fellas.
up? It's a We Got Balls Wednesday. Glad you guys are here. Hey, JP. Hey, Tony. Hey, Carrie. Glad y'all are in the house today. Scotty,
Welcome,
Scotty,
fellas.
Scotty. What's going on? How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling okay. I'm a little stressed out. It was a stressful weekend, but good.
Yeah.
We celebrated my birthday with some buddies in town and had a great time, but it was, it was more intense. Probably my eyes were bigger than my belly in terms of what I bit off. And then I'm going to be going to an intensive this weekend with Brothers Road called Journey Continues. So I'm excited about that, but I'm also a little bit, as the Jewish word would say, spelkus. I've got a little churning in my tummy. So that's Yiddish, by the way.
Yiddish. Hey, David.
Oh,
Hey,
hello,
Wilhelm. Hey, John.
Pastor Mike. Pastor Mike
Pastor.
from Georgia is here. Pastor Mike and I have been friends a long time.
Oh, glad
And
you're
I'm glad
here,
he's
buddy.
here.
Well, it's not Scott's belated birthday yet. Scott's birthday isn't until tomorrow if you're listening to this live. If you're listening to a recording, it was a few weeks ago. But if you want to wish him happy birthday wishes, it is tomorrow, right, Scott? Is that when your actual birth date is? Okay.
It is tomorrow. I will be 63 years young tomorrow. So
still looking like a man with a baby punum, as they say in the Yiddish. So,
okay.
Look that up. So.
I haven't heard that Yiddish thing, but all right.
Yeah, your punum is your face. So
my punum. Okay, yeah, I know what a punum is.
Yeah, it is. So, well, guys, we definitely are here for an interesting conversation today. In fact, Scott and I may actually get a little crossways because we have some opinions about this that we may not agree on. Because what we're going to talk about today is what is the value of masturbation. And I kind of came out at this topic because everywhere I'm listening to in the culture, in movies, I mean, I think about the scene in The Wolf of Wall Street where he's talking about, you got to pump those numbers up to masturbate a couple times a day to deal with the stress of being a stockbroker. Different guys talk about how when they wake up in the morning, masturbation is the thing that they do to get themselves going, or when you're tired at night, you use that to calm down. So there's this practice that many of us use and a lot of us are struggling to make sense of, that we want to talk about why it works the way that it works. What is it exactly designed to do? So, Scott, when you think about this idea of the effectiveness and the usefulness of masturbation, what is it that first comes to your mind?
Don't do it, because I was taught that it was sin, and if you do it, you could lose your salvation, possibly, and it leads to nothing good, and it's just a bad thing. And so, yeah, it's a very and now I was not taught that by my dad. I was taught, you can masturbate, nothing wrong with it, as long as you don't do it more than 3 times a week. That's what my dad taught me. So
Luke says, I did it once and now I'm blind.
Then you're hitting yourself in the eyeball, Luke. No, so I never felt bad about it unless I did it that many times, 4 or 5 times a week, which I broke that often as a teenager. But once I got, into the church community, it was really forbidden in our conservative evangelical group, which was a bunch of bullshit, because later I found out that all the leaders who were married guys and traveled a lot were masturbating, and then they would project their shame from the pulpit on everybody else, all of us young guys, and because they were feeling bad about stuff themselves. So this is one of those topics where I think in the culture, people would ridicule you and laugh at you. Most sex therapists would say there's nothing wrong with masturbation. It's a completely perfectly healthy activity. And I think we're going to come down more on a neutral side, that it depends on how you're using it and what you're using it for and when you're using it, whether it's going to be helpful to you or possibly not as helpful to you. And we want to keep an open mind about that, but we're not going to take a shaming stance on it in any case, whatever we do. So, and even if you and I disagree, Chris. Every part of you is welcome with me, my friend.
Oh, I feel the same way. So got a poll question for you guys. How do you feel about masturbation? Is it healthy, unhealthy, or neither? Is it in the neutral category? And I can tell you my experience around masturbation was silence, like literally nothing. I didn't even know what it was. And I've said this before on this podcast. I didn't discover masturbation until I was a senior in high school, which is really late in the game. But there are some guys that in this dynamic, they discover masturbation very, very young. And we've kind of alluded to this, and we hear guys tell stories about it all the time, where they begin to touch themselves and self-soothe by masturbating when they're children, like 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. So what is it that's going on with guys in that season of their life when they learn to cope with their emotional experiences, their very visceral emotional experiences at that age?
Yeah, it's a sign of distress. So any child that is masturbating regularly at a young age, 3 to 5 years of age, that can be a sign of sexual abuse. It can be a sign of sexual experimentation. It's definitely a sign of emotional dysregulation because the child has learned to automatically soothe, or what we call auto-regulate in psychology, by touching their body and generating pleasure through this area of their body, because it's very easy to touch your penis as a boy, and it does feel good, and it is soothing. And so it's a form of self-soothing. So that generally is going to mean, and we'll talk about this in a minute when we show our affect continuum, that a lot of times we're using it to either soothe ourselves or to stimulate ourselves, to pick ourselves up out of a down emotional state, to soothe ourselves out of a too high emotional state. So typically there's a sign of real emotional distress or dysregulation in a child that's masturbating prior to puberty a lot.
But
So that's one thing.
doesn't also that mean that there's a emotional dynamic in the home life that's not being cared for and not being addressed? Because when a child has to go to this type of self-soothing behavior to feel okay in their body, and like I said, many times it's very not automatic. It's not the word I want to use. It's
It is automatic and involuntary.
involuntary was the word I wanted to use. So Carrie says, I discovered it very young and don't remember how. So you're just there, with your hands in your pants and you start brushing up against your penis and it feels good. And so then what do you do with that? How do you make sense of that? And that environment is because I don't have somebody to help me soothe externally those emotional feelings. So I've got to do that internally in my own body so that I can feel okay about myself and feel like that things are not chaotic around me.
That's right. And then if you have a parent that shames you for actually touching your penis, you're going to intensify the use of that. It becomes more secretive. It gets shame attached to it. And then you can have another emotion that you're masturbating. Typically, a child is going to masturbate out of a sense of anger or fear to self-soothe, or they're going to do it out of a sense of sadness because they do feel alone. They feel rejected, they feel abandoned, and so they're soothing themselves up, they're upregulating themselves out of sadness. But then if you attach shame to it, if you shame it as a behavior, you're going to get that additional emotion of shame that becomes associated with it too. So and in fact, maybe now's a good time to show that emotional regulation.
Let's hold off on that, because I think before we get to that chart, we've got to address the H word. We've talked about the emotional drivers of masturbation, called in an acronym HALT BS. Horny, angry, or is it hungry or horny? The first one.
Hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, stressed.
That's right. So hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, stressed. But what about this idea of being horny? When you go from childhood into adulthood, and you start to feel these feelings in your body and these urges and these longings and these attractions, and we've covered them in all the different episodes that we've done on our arousal template. What is it that a kid can express, or a young man can express, when he says, I'm feeling horny? Because a lot of times when I first hang out with guys, I ask them what they're feeling, and they have their 3 main emotion words. You know what those are? Horny, hungry, and angry. That's it. That's the default emotional state of most guys. They don't really have emotional language to describe lonely or scared or bored or afraid. They just say, I'm horny. I just feel horny all the time. And a lot of that comes with the experience of being a teenager, and you go into puberty, and here you are with no way to regulate these very intensive emotions. And so masturbation becomes your best friend. And in fact, when most people that we talk to really begin to have a compulsive use of masturbation, it's typically in puberty.
Right. But again, you're going back to the families of origin system where my emotions are not being seen and I'm not being attuned to by my parents. So the only recourse I have is to automatically soothe or stimulate myself, and touching my penis becomes the way to do it as a child. As a teenager, then I begin to associate those emotional states that I'm not allowed to feel with the state of horniness, which is a precursor to actually masturbating, because those neurons that fire together for sexual arousal and stimulation get linked to the neurons that are devoted to feeling intense emotional states like angry, afraid, sad, shame. And so what I'm doing is I'm using a masturbation to bypass emotions. I don't feel my feelings, I jack my feelings off.
Okay.
And that becomes a common way of surviving an environment where nobody is attuned to me, and I don't really know how to name or feel anything in my body other than sexual arousal. So sexual arousal at that point becomes associated with the disassociated emotions. Those emotions come up. I don't feel them because nobody helped me feel them and name them. I don't know how to feel them, but I do know how to feel horniness because of the pleasure that sexual arousal brings. So the minute I feel anger, I immediately bypass it and I feel instead horny, and I go to masturbate. And that's how I deal with my anger, which, by the way, is why so many men's arousal structures are built around anger and aggression, which is why so much pornography is designed to appeal to that angry, aggressive, dissociated emotion that we don't know how to engage. So it's very common for men to have eroticized rage because men have more testosterone. We're more aggressive than females anyway. And when those emotions, and the way men are socialized is to not be angry because male anger can be dangerous. So if you grow up in a home or a religious system, a lot of evangelical Christianity, for example, it doesn't allow men to be dangerous. It doesn't allow them to have their emotions of anger.
Anger is a no-go zone.
So when you dissociate from anger, it's going to end up being attached to your sexual arousal structures, and you get what's called eroticized rage. Every time I feel rage, I get a boner, or every time I feel rage, I get horny and I want to jack off. And that's super common in the male arousal structures.
For me, that really was the idea that I was attracted to. Is it wasn't anger necessarily, but it was loneliness. It was this idea that I don't have a place to connect. And so I'm looking for an outlet to experience connection in my body. And so when I began to realize that masturbation was actually something that I could do to auto-regulate that loneliness, that was where I would go to. And a lot of people, especially in religious communities, associate masturbation with the concept of lust. I don't know if we've talked about this here or in a while, but lust and anger are really the two sides of the same coin. I'm longing to experience connection. I'm longing to find justice in my life. I don't know how to do that. And so I begin to act out either with rage or with desire, over desire, which is what lust really is. It's a desire gone mad. So RMC joining late. Great topic today. I know it's been foreign to him. Thanks for the super chat, RMC. Glad you're here, buddy. So, Scott, there is this idea that our emotional world drives our desire to masturbate. Is that really necessary? Can we not just learn to regulate our emotions and be aware of our emotions, or is masturbation a fast track to how we can process through those things?
Well, no, masturbating doesn't really regulate your emotions except for temporarily bypassing them. So it's another bypass. And what you've got to look at is what are the core emotional states that you're not feeling if you want to actually grow and become more of a mature man. A mature man is somebody that has a sense of agency in his emotional life. You cannot feel like you are in control, like you have power as a man, unless you have some degree of power over your own emotional states. And most men feel very disenfranchised and cut off from their emotional regulation. And so this is their way for feeling powerful. In fact, I think masturbation and porn in particular appeal to men's sense of powerlessness, because it is the one thing that you can do with your body where you feel momentarily powerful in a very powerless situation. And so it tends to be associated with that, state of hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, stressed. We could also say helpless, hopeless, worthless. When I feel helpless, I'm going to look for something. But again, these are secondary emotions. I think if we could share that graphic, producer Jacoby, on the emotional states, everybody can kind of see graphically what we're talking about. So we call this our affect continuum. And affect is a description of what emotions feel like in terms of physical sensations in your body, what are the impulses that they generate, and then what are the named core emotions that we identify as being associated with those physical sensations and the impulses. So if you think about affect existing on a spectrum from very, very low arousal on a scale from 1 to 10, so 1 would be the lowest, 10 would be the highest. So let's give some language to this. Low affect in the blue zone starts off with a 1. I'm numb, I'm dissociated, I feel empty and collapsed inside, I feel dead. It can go up to 3 in terms of energy increase, but it still feels like I'm not my best self, I'm not very alive. And so in this state of the blue zone, which is technically called hypoarousal, means underarousal, I'm dysregulated, so I'm not in the best state of my emotional state. And my greatest need here is to really feel alive. And so in this state, I use masturbation to make me temporarily feel alive, because I can do something with my body that generates a lot of energy. Sexual activity generates activity or generates energy in me, and I feel much better, and I get out of this impulse to feel really frozen with these feelings of sadness or disgust or shame. So those are the two kind of core emotions that we look at in the blue zone: sadness or disgust or shame. Moving up then, the affect continuum, you get into this area where we call the open-hearted state between a 4 and a 7, where I feel either tender, low energy, connected, but it feels good in the body, or high energy would be happiness, sexual excitement, sometimes excitement, and I feel like my best self here. And so we've got these 8 words: curious, compassionate, confident, clear, calm, connected, creative, courageous. When I'm at my best, I feel that way in my body. But when I get out of that zone, I'm either going to be in the blue zone, or the red zone is the other high end of the spectrum, where I feel anger and I want to fight is my impulse, or I feel afraid and I want to flee. And that goes from a low of 8 to a high of 10. 10 would be rage, panic, terror. Now, nobody stays in the yellow-green zone all the time. We all get dysregulated. We all get either over-aroused or under-aroused at times. But people who grow up in a home where their mom and dad are attuned to them and learn to regulate their emotions know how to get out of these states, sometimes on their own, or sometimes they go to other people to be regulated. But people that grow up with insecure attachment, in other words, their parents were never attuned to them, so they don't learn to go to other people to have their emotions regulated, have to end up doing this themselves. And that's the purpose of masturbation. So often, guys will masturbate when they're angry, or when they're afraid, or when they're feeling sadness, or when they're feeling disgust or even shame.
Well, in our poll question, Scott, sadness was the big winner. 56% of the guys say they often go to masturbate when they're feeling sad. And push your microphone back a little bit, Scott. You're too hot.
Oh, sorry, I'm leaning forward. So there you go. And what was the second highest?
Second highest was anxious, afraid at 25%.
Okay, so there we go. We're either using it to soothe ourselves or to stimulate ourselves out of these emotional states. Thanks, Jacoby. You can take that down now. So
Yep.
the way we work with guys, when we start off, a guy comes to us for coaching and he wants to belong in the group and wants to get help with kind of out of control sexual behaviors. We don't start with the sexual behavior because the sexual behavior is serving a purpose, and the purpose it's serving is to regulate these emotional states. So we go right to the cause of the problem, which is I don't know how to feel, let alone even name what I'm feeling in my body. And so the point of healing addiction, which comes out of complex trauma. So another way of saying this is the way to heal our childhood traumas is to begin starting to name and feeling emotions in our body. And that's how we use this graphic, is to help guys understand that process of naming and then therefore taming what is going on in my body. Because if I can start to gain a sense of control over my emotional life, I don't then have to automatically and involuntarily go to masturbate when I feel these big scary emotions, or these big, we call them our big feels. So I begin to feel them, and you've heard guys say this, Chris, they're surprised at how much they actually feel.
Yeah.
Like,
well, they've been
holy
numbing
shit.
themselves out with masturbation for all this time, and they come in concerned about, I'm doing this too much, or I'm too dependent on it, or I feel like I need it, and it's a problem. And I think, whenever you're using anything in life as a coping behavior, whether it's masturbation or food or alcohol or drugs or gaming or social media, whatever it is, you get to a place where you're like, this just seems to be a drain on me. It's not filling me up like it used to. It's that law of diminishing return. And so they come in thinking the problem is the frequency that they use the behavior. And so a lot of guys see that as a place of shame that they're already starting with, instead of being able to say, there's a reason why I use this behavior to cope with my life.
That's right. So that's where we start, is beginning to feel those big feelings, anger, fear, sadness, shame in my body. Now, you mentioned the acronym HALT, BS, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, stressed. Well, hungry is not an emotion.
Oh, really?
But
I feel hungry in my body. What are you talking about? How can it not be an emotion?
It is linked to affective states, because in the brain stem, which controls the body's autonomic functions, so body temperature, breathing rate, heart rate, hunger, thirst, sex drive, is all controlled by the lower part of the brain stem. And in that lower part of the brain are what are called affective circuits, which is that graphic affect. The word affective is part of affect. And those circuits are the basis of where our emotions are generated. So there is a link between hunger and anger, in the fact that when we're hungry, we tend to be more angry. And there's some fascinating research on this. For example, you never want to be judged by a jury right before the jury goes to lunch, because the evidence has shown that juries make very harsh moral judgments when the jurors have not eaten.
That's it.
Isn't that interesting?
I think it's very wise to be like, hey, listen, you want to make sure you're in that window of tolerance, that in that zone of feeling safe and connected before you begin to deal with a stressful situation. And definitely passing a sentence on somebody else's life is pretty stressful.
Yeah. But those affective circuits they're unconscious, they're involuntary, which is why when you're hungry, you can get horny too, because if you don't eat on time, your blood sugar's low, your judgment is lower, you have less impulse control. And so that's why it's been used in sexual addiction as a mnemonic device to help remember these are the states in which we're more likely to act out. Well, let's go to lonely. Lonely is not a core emotion that we mentioned. Angry, afraid, sad, shame.
Yep.
But lonely is a secondary emotion. So what is underneath loneliness? What emotions do you think are underneath loneliness?
I think there's a feeling of disconnection, a feeling of loss, a feeling of being left out, a feeling of not belonging. Loneliness is tied to that relational disconnection piece that we talked about earlier when, kids are young and they masturbate as children because they're looking for something to regulate themselves. And so lonely is like, I don't have what I need relationally or emotionally right now.
Okay, and I'm going to propose that comes from two core emotions.
Okay.
One would be afraid.
Okay.
So there is a sense in which, because we are social creatures and we are designed to live in close community with one another, when I do not experience that in my body with my parents or other caregivers, I am going to have a fear of being cast out. And that is a combination of both fear and shame. Shame, I think, is a subsystem related to fear, but it's specific to social fear. I will be cast out of the tribe.
Yeah.
And that feeling of loneliness is related to both a fear that I will be alone, but also that I will be rejected by the tribe. And so I think loneliness feeds into those elements of our story that really, as boys, we felt very alone and very rejected and very unwanted or lacking belonging in some way.
Scott, it's been a while. 69 online. Woohoo!
Yay!
Celebrate. Bored. Man, this is where a lot of guys really come in and say, I wake up in the morning, I need to get started, or I go to bed at night, I need something to get me to sleep. It seems to be this boredom thing triggers a lot of emotional variety in guys because they don't want to admit that boredom really is a place of longing in their body that they're trying to find an emotional connection to.
That's right. So what is boredom? Is a secondary emotion. What are the core emotions underneath boredom?
Could it be, would fear be one of them?
Fear. Okay. I'm alone. I'm going to be alone. I have no purpose.
Yes.
I'm not going to have a purpose. And again, disgust or shame.
Yep.
There's something really wrong with me. Why do I go to masturbate every time I'm feeling bored? Why is this the only thing I can? Why am I not interested in anything else? So a lot of guys go to toss one off because, hey, wherever I go, there my penis is, and it provides instant excitement. So a lot of this is related to, what did I do to come alive as a boy?
That's a good question. What did you do to come alive as a boy, Scott?
A lot of times masturbated. So what's the core emotion there is sadness. Because who was with me as a child when I was bored? I was told to just go to my room and do something or read a book or whatever. Yeah. So I found a way to make some excitement happen for me. And oftentimes that's the only way a lot of us learned how to feel excited was by being sexually excited. So boredom gets associated then with sexual excitement. So when I'm bored, I get horny because I know that's the way I can get out of that down, empty, dead kind of bored feeling inside.
And again, that's how your body is trained to associate sexual arousal with these emotional states. And then it becomes a bypass, does it not? You don't think about that you're sad. You don't think about that you're lonely. You don't think about that you're bored. You just go, I got nothing to do. Okay, let me go back to the old well and just wank one out and see what happens. I'll feel better if I do that.
Yeah. Yep. And Kerry says, I think this is interesting that he said that I have recently experienced some prescribed medications for an injury that block my own ability to feel my emotions, but it also makes the desire for masturbation non-existent for me. Well, there you go. So much of what Kerry's saying there is he realizes now that a lot of his sexual desire is being driven by emotional states, which makes sense because sexual desire is an emotional state.
Yep.
It is an emotion. So that's the thing I think to be curious about is, again, we're not when we're working with somebody, we're not trying to stamp out masturbation from their life necessarily, unless it's creating a lot of problems for them in their relationships. Compulsive sexual behavior can lead to problems at work. If you're masturbating multiple times a day and you're not getting your schoolwork done or you're not getting your job assignments done, you might end up losing your job. If you're watching pornography while you're masturbating on a work computer, you will get fired.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there are ramifications to sexually compulsive behavior where it begins to affect your work life, your sense of self, your relational dynamics. And that's when we're inviting guys to think about, well, okay, if you're going to change this, you have to do the work of kind of going back to where this starts in your life. And it's the lack of emotional intelligence or skill training that most of us as men didn't experience growing up. And so we learned to use masturbation as this catch-all problem to deal with all our emotions. I'm tired at night. I lay in bed with anxiety. I toss and turn. So I toss one off so I can go to sleep. Somebody's already said that. I go to sleep immediately after I ejaculate. Yes, yep. Because oxytocin is generated in your body, which is that feel-good chemical, and it helps you go to sleep. But why have you not been able to learn to go to sleep without masturbating after 40 years? Because it's become such a persistent go-to.
And don't you think it's the mindlessness of masturbation, Scott, that is the biggest issue? Because a lot of guys, they don't really think about the frequency or the ramifications unless maybe there's a relational or, like you mentioned, a work problem. And so when guys are in this spot, they think about, well, it works fine for me. I don't have any problems with it. This is just what I do. I've talked to guys who say, that's just the routine in the morning as I get up and I rub one out and then I go to work. Or like the other guys saying, I have time to masturbate before I go to sleep, and that calms me down. So when we talk about why masturbation works so well, I think we also have to realize how we've become as men comfortable with just not feeling our feelings. And that's almost a societal thing that we've been trained to do, right?
It is a societal thing we've been trained to do. We were trained to do it in our families. We're trained to do it for the large part in a lot of the church environments we grow up in. So men suffer from this condition called male normative alexithymia, which is the inability to name and feel emotions in their body. That is also why men are susceptible to addictions more than females. Almost all addicts in every dimension of addiction are males, because we don't feel our feelings. So the way that males are uniquely damaged in their developmental stages is this emotional area. So if we're going to heal and we're going to put masturbation back into a proper perspective, then we're going to have to start with our emotional lives and start to feel and name things in our bodies. Also, masturbating, having an orgasm, doesn't really deal with the emotions. It's just a way to placate. It's a pacifier.
It is a pacifier.
So you learn to soothe yourself with it. You learn to pick yourself up when you're feeling down, but you're not developing any emotional bandwidth in your nervous system to actually handle intense emotions. So when they come up, you become over-reliant on this one particular thing. And again, we're not against masturbation, just like we're not against having a glass of wine. But if every time you feel emotionally dysregulated, you go to have a glass of wine or two, you're going to start to become an alcoholic. The same thing happens with sexual addiction. If you use this every time to deal with your emotions, then this becomes associated with every emotional state, and you're going to overuse it, and you're going to start experiencing some wreckage probably in your personal and relational life. That's what we're inviting guys to think about is this out of control? So we've got another poll. Did we ask the frequency
how many
question?
times a day did guys masturbate? Weekly was the number one answer, 50%, daily 26%. Rarely 14%, and then multiple times a day, 8%. So it's a pretty moderated group of guys.
So I would say if you're in the category of multiple times a day or daily, you may want to start to consider your sexual story and when masturbation came into your life and when you learned to use it like that. Because if you're in a partnered relationship, that level of sexual frequency is not going to be sustainable for long, right? You're not going to be able to have sex with your spouse multiple times a day for more than a couple of years in early marriage. And then it's going to settle into the average is couples are having sex about 4 times a week. Does that mean masturbation's wrong in the context of marriage? Well, you have to talk to your partner about that. There are some spouses that only want you to be sexual with them. There are other spouses that are like, I don't care if you toss one off as long as we're communicating and talking about it.
Mm.
So every couple has to evaluate that for themselves. Again, we're not stigmatizing masturbation, but we are asking you to be curious about the level of masturbation that you use. Is it something that you feel good about, or do you feel a lot of shame about it? And do you feel like you might be using it to pacify your emotions when you're really stunting your own emotional maturity in the process?
Jim Whitman, thanks for the super chat. Glad you're here, buddy. I can't imagine not masturbating. It's one of the things that helps clear my mind and gives prostate health. So there is a side benefit to having an ejaculation, and we've talked about that before, and the value of prostate health. So thank you, Jim, for your support. And to say imagine yourself not masturbating, I think that's what we're saying is we are not inviting you to stop masturbating. We're inviting you to be curious about what's going on as you masturbate. What is the thing that you're trying to do to what are you trying to accomplish through that behavior? And what's the overall drive behind that story? Scott mentioned your sexual story. So much of our sexual story is wrapped up. It did become an auto-regulatory behavior in my teenage years or young adulthood because I didn't know how to feel my emotions. So can you say I know how to connect with my emotional world? And Scott, when guys are doing that, how do we get guys to move into an understanding of whether or not they're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, or stressed? How does one begin to become self-aware?
The number one thing that you need in your life is a safe person to help build self-awareness of your emotions with you.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you grow up in an environment where you did not have the attunement of parents, you cannot feel these feelings on your own. You're going to need the help of another human being. And the number one requirement of a human being to help you with this is emotional safety. You have to know that every part of you is welcome with them, including the part that wants to masturbate multiple times a day. So they're not going to shame you. They're not going to try to scold you or lecture you or shut you down. They're going to work with you to help you accomplish your goals for how masturbation or not masturbating is going to fit into your life. And that is that ability to just hold space for another person. It's the ability to be able to, the safe person that does this has to have done it themselves, because I can't take you further than I've gone.
Right.
So if I don't know how to feel emotions in my body, how can I possibly teach you how to do that?
Which is why a lot of men learn from their dads, and they had the same emotional bandwidth that their fathers had. And so they're kind of stuck in that same dynamic, and they have to have a safe, attuned person to help invite them into feeling their feelings.
So I would also say, Chris, that, we tend to think that a counselor or therapist is going to help us with this, but most counselors and therapists were trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
Yes.
And they do not focus on emotional regulation as a core component of their therapeutic process. Most therapists are females. Most people seeking the help of a therapist or counselor are females. So I think this is a really neglected area for male mental health. Is there aren't a lot of male therapists that know how to teach males to feel their emotions. Not that you need to be, but it certainly helps to have somebody that you can identify with as another male who's been like, hey, I had to learn this. This is a skill. You can grow in your emotional intelligence just like you can in other areas of intelligence. And let's do this together. So I think it's a really critical thing that guys have that in their lives, which is what we provide both in coaching and in our group environments. We start every group meeting with that affect regulation process where guys check in with their emotions, because how you're starting off, whether in a coaching meeting or whether in a group meeting from an emotional standpoint, is super critical, not just for you, but for every relationship in the group. And our relationship together as a coach and somebody we're working with, and then helping you begin to know, oh, I'm feeling angry. Or let's say I come to you and I go, I just jacked off to porn last night, Chris. And your response is, hey, thanks for being vulnerable with me. I know what that's like. But what emotion were you feeling right before you got horny?
And I think the anticipated reaction to that is, oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that, instead of the curiosity and kindness that we offer, which is, oh, well, there's something there. Tell me more about what was going on with you when you decided to go down that road.
Yep, exactly. A good question. We had the question about prostate health and frequency. So the studies I've seen on this is the prostate health for prostate cancer reduction rates is about 21 ejaculations a month for a man. So you're either having sex 21 times a month or masturbating or some combination of that seems to reduce the level of prostate cancer in certain groups of guys that were surveyed. I don't know that that's definitive really, but I think it makes sense from a prostate standpoint to make sure as an adult you're ejaculating at least a couple of times a week. But let's see what else. I'm just looking over. Daryl says, I can definitely understand how doing this too much would be a problem. Well, again, what's too much and when does it become a problem? We got to define those terms. So
yeah. And Daryl, by the way, you said you sent us a question. I looked through our emails. I couldn't find it. Send that question again. We want to respond to what you shared with us. You can always reach us at wegotballspod00@gmail.com with your questions. And Scott, I think the biggest final debate is should someone use masturbation to regulate their emotion when there's no other option? When I don't know what to do, can I use this as a shortcut to just feel better?
I would not use masturbation in that way, because I think it keeps you stuck in this feedback loop that was created very young in your life, and it's activating, it's continuing to build that association between these intense emotional states that I don't know how to manage and my sexual life. And I don't think you want to create that reinforcement. So if you're going to masturbate, my suggestion is that you actually plan it or make it an intentional activity that you're not engaging in when you're in an intense emotional state, particularly angry, afraid, sadness, or shame.
Yep.
Now, I will say this. Sex does serve an important role in comfort in our lives. I believe that's one of the reasons God gave us the gift of sex. So it is common to want to receive comfort by being sexual when you are hurting, when you are suffering.
Yep.
But I wouldn't make that the only thing. Like, we want to develop a well-rounded approach to engaging our emotions. And frankly, if you've been using this since you were a child, that's not a well-rounded approach. It's probably the only way you know to regulate your emotions. So I would say give it some time, try to put forth a decent amount of, maybe a year of learning to regulate your emotions in the context of relationships with other people, and then see how often you feel like you need to masturbate in regards to any kind of emotional state. And I would say keep it to the positive, tender states. I'm feeling really connected with myself, or I'm feeling really connected and happy right now, and I just want to enjoy an orgasm. And if you don't have that available to you as a single guy or a married guy who's got health problems, I don't think there's any shame in that. But I think it needs to be intentional, and it needs to not be an automatic emotional regulation tool.
So that, I think, is important. And hey, Just a Dude, glad you're here. He says, I have a lot of experience with this topic. I think everybody on this podcast, on the chat, have a lot of experience with this topic.
We all have masturbated.
We have all done it. Smash the like button if you've ever masturbated before, so you can invite other guys into this conversation. So
Carrie says, so we should pursue relational connection with our emotions, and that leads to relational development. Yes. What relational connection is masturbating giving you? Nothing. Yes. There's no relationship with anybody. So that's why it doesn't ultimately get to the emotional regulation that you are going to receive in connection with another person. Your emotions were intended to be regulated by another human being, and then by yourself with healthy regulation strategies, which masturbation may or may not be a part of. But in general, you want to have a balanced approach to emotional regulation and not rely on any one thing, not become over dependent on any one thing. Sorry.
No, and I think it's important to remind ourselves of that, because we were meant to live in relationship, and we were meant to have emotional connections with ourselves and emotional connections with others. And so masturbation just becomes a handicap to that sometimes. It
Yes.
does not allow me to be fully connected to myself and fully connected to others. And again, we're not shaming the practice. We are not saying don't masturbate. We're merely saying there might be something going on if masturbation is your first course of action when you're having feelings that you can't explain. And we would invite you to become self-aware and to connect with other people who can feel with you. I think when we talk about our group, Scott, we check in with that affect regulation chart, and then we check out, because we want to show the guys how their emotions have been affected by spending face time with people who are safe and attuned. And so if
Yep.
you're interested in that kind of connection, you can join one of our groups by going to wegotballspod.com and setting up an appointment with Scott or I. Can also help you with individual coaching so that you can understand what's really going on with you emotionally. And you can come to one of our retreats where we really do a lot of work. And it's amazing how in 3 days, really guys get a lot of emotional connection and attunement in a way that they maybe have never gotten before. And they feel they have a different experience in their body around what is necessary for them to emotionally be self-aware and to regulate. So,
and I would, Luke says, hey, thanks for picking up on this topic. It shouldn't be embarrassing, but it is for many. It is an embarrassing topic for many. And that's why we wanted to talk about it today, to create a safe place where we could have this discussion as men. We're all men. We should be able to talk about this without any shame or embarrassment, because all of us masturbate or have masturbated. And that's the truth.
So be kind to yourself, as we always say, and be curious and find out what's really going behind the masturbation practices so that you can be in a community of men. And RMC, thank you so much for affirming the weekly groups and attending retreats. That's definitely a place of growth, and we want to have as many guys attend that as possible, because we want to create safety for all you guys here, right here on We Got Balls.
And you do too.
See you soon, everybody.